Right, we are now officially live here in Port Elizabeth with none other than former astronaut Dr. Don Thomas. Let's go woo for Dr. Don Thomas in your silent. Wave your fingers around. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And Dr. Thomas has had 4 shuttle missions. That means he's been to space 4 times, and he has got a very interesting story to tell. And we're going to ask him just to give us a little introduction to himself and some information about him. And then we're going to open the floor and ask you guys to ask some questions. And remember, you can ask anything you like. So over to you, Don.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. As you heard, my name is Don Thomas. I had the amazing opportunity to fly on 4 space shuttle missions. 3 of those were aboard Columbia, and 1 was on Space Shuttle Discovery. I've spent a total of 44 days up in space, and during that time, I went around the Earth, all the way around, 692 times. So I got to see a lot of our planet, from the top of Mount Everest to seeing the Great Barrier Reef off Australia to the Amazon rainforest. I've seen so many incredible sights from orbiting planet Earth above.
That is very cool. So you've obviously, I mean, you had to train to become an astronaut. You don't just win a lottery. So maybe just tell us a little bit more about some of the training that you did.
Yeah, you know, I got selected to be an astronaut in 1990. So I was just in my mid-30s then. And it was 4 years of training for my first flight. And that's pretty amazing. For a 15-day space shuttle mission, I trained for 4 years. You know, it was like a full-time job. And there's just so much we need to know. We spend a lot of our time in the classroom, like our students and learners are doing here today. We spend time in simulators, models of the space shuttle, practicing all the procedures, memorizing where the switches are. We train in jets. You know, we fly in jets and get high gravity on us. We train underwater to do spacewalks. So the training was an incredible amount of fun. I had such a good time every day.
Wow. So, I mean, I'm sure that after spending 10 days with you, traveling all the way along the Garden Route, which is a beautiful part of our country, I've had a chance to hear a lot of audience members ask questions, but I think it'd be really cool if you guys had questions. And before we start with that first question, I know that Shyla has sent us a question, and I'm going to read it out to you. Let's see if I can find it. It's over here. Right, Shyla wanted to know. She said, we were reading a short article last night about the NASA sleep studies, and we would love it if you would ask some questions about the effects of prolonged periods in space on the human body, why and how sleep studies are conducted, and what has been learned from them.
Okay. Well, you know, a number of things happen to the human body in space because we have 0 gravity up there. Because of 0 gravity, we don't use our muscles very much. So the first thing that happens, your muscles get a lot weaker in space. Our bones also get weaker. The one thing that makes our bones strong here on Earth is putting force on them. Weightlifters have the strongest bones of any athlete. In space, we're floating all the time. There's no weight on our bones, so they get weaker in space. We're also exposed to more radiation in space. So we get more cosmic radiation, more ultraviolet radiation than here on Earth. And that's a problem for long-term health, but it isn't a really big deal in the short term.
Okay, that was a great question. So now we're going to move over to Justin's class. Do any of your students have any questions? Just unmute the microphone, and then you guys can ask away. Oh, we got some feedback from the speakers there. Maybe what we could do is, if you want to just type a question, and until we work out what we're going to do about the speakers, that's no problem. Let's move over to Lainey. Do any of your students have any questions? No response there. We're going to move over to Lonnie. Do any of your students have any questions? I see someone does have a question. Just unmute yourself so we can actually hear the question. And then we'll go back to Justin's class. I saw a question there as well. So just click on the little microphone.
I have one question. How do you sleep at night?
How do you sleep at night?
Yeah, we don't have any dedicated bedrooms. The inside of the space shuttle was pretty small for the astronauts. So at bedtime, we would just take a sleeping bag. We would attach it to the wall with a few clips, and then you just float up there, slip inside of it, zip it up, and you go to bed. If you wanted to, you could put your sleeping bag up on the ceiling. And almost every astronaut, at least one night, they'll sleep up on the ceiling. So it's very comfortable. There's no pressure on your body because you don't have gravity. You're not laying on a mattress, and it feels very, very comfortable. It's just a lot of fun sleeping up there because you're floating inside your sleeping bag.
That's a good question.
Really cool.
But now wait, just to take that a little further, about sleeping, what is the natural position of when you're sleeping?
When you're sleeping, the arms tend to come up and float right in front of you. So can you imagine when you wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, and the first thing you see are two hands floating in front of your face? So astronauts are not that brave, and so we'll tuck our arms in like this when we're sleeping, just to keep them from floating out. And you don't want to accidentally hit a switch or bump a cable, do some damage. So we get inside our sleeping bags and tuck our arms in like this.
Good question. There was another question from that group.
Is it hot or cold in space?
It is both hot and cold. We orbit the Earth every hour and a half. We get 45 minutes of daylight, 45 minutes of nighttime. In the daylight, it's very hot outside. It's about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees centigrade. At nighttime, the temperature drops to about minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe minus 100 or so centigrade. So as we orbit the Earth, 45 minutes when it's super hot, 45 minutes super cold. But inside, we keep it at room temperature. It's very comfortable there.
Good question. Good question. Do you have air conditioning?
We've got air conditioning and heating because in the daylight, it'll get hot and we'll turn up the air conditioning. At nighttime, you'll feel it getting a little cold. We'll turn up the heater, just like at home.
Okay, now Justin had his group had a question, and it was, how do you not float away? That's an interesting question.
Everything floats in space. And if we're going to do a spacewalk and we go outside the space shuttle, we would have what we call a tether. It's a cable to physically attach us to the space shuttle. And that's in case we're working on something and we let go with our hands and we start floating away. We can pull this cable and pull us back to the space shuttle. We also have a little jetpack on our spacesuit. And if for some reason that cable should break, we're floating away, we can fire some little jets on our backpack and it'll push us closer to the space station and we can grab on again.
That is super cool. So Justin's class, if you want to maybe send through more questions, unless you've sorted out the microphone issue. Tulani, do you have anyone in your group that would like to ask any questions? Just unmute on that side. So you just have to click on the microphone to unmute yourself if you do have a question on that side. While Tulani's getting that sorted out, I saw a question coming from Justin's group, and Justin's group wanted to know, how do you eat in space?
Yeah, eating is a little different than here on Earth. Because we don't have a refrigerator or a freezer or a microwave oven, all the food we eat in space is freeze-dried. And it comes in small plastic packages like I'm holding here. And freeze-dried food is regular cooked food. We freeze it. We remove all the moisture, so we dry it out. And then we put it in these plastic bags. They vacuum seal it. And to eat this food, what we have to do is add water. So we have a sharp needle that'll poke into that package. We can inject hot water. That dry, hard food will absorb that water, soften up, and after a few minutes, it's ready to eat. We would just cut this package open with a pair of scissors and then eat it with a normal fork or spoon. All the food has a little blue dot of Velcro. This one has 3 dots. Maybe you can see them. There's 1, 2, and 3. And after we make our meal, we would just Velcro it to ourselves. It'll stick to you. We could float to the window and watch the Earth go by, and we have our lunch or dinner right there. It's very convenient eating in space.
That is pretty cool. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Tulani, maybe your group would like to ask a question. Just unmute yourself if you would like to try. Okay, so while they're trying to unmute, we're going to go back to Lonnie's group. The students want to know, how long is a day in space?
Technically, a day in space from sunrise to sunrise is only 90 minutes in space. So we go around the Earth every hour and a half. The sun comes up, we get 45 minutes of daylight. The sun sets, we get 45 minutes of nighttime. So technically, sunrise to sunrise, a 90-minute day in space. But we operate on a 24-hour clock in space. So we get 8 hours to sleep, we get an hour to exercise, maybe an hour for breakfast and for lunch, and then we work the rest of the day up there. So we're used to working on a 24-hour day here on Earth, and that's what we do in space.
That is pretty cool. And then Laney's class, they want to know, how do you walk on the moon?
I wish I could answer that question from experience. I never went to the moon. And I was in high school when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon 49 years ago. And it's easy to walk on the moon because the moon doesn't have zero gravity. It has 1/6 the gravity here on Earth. So you walk on the moon, and Neil Armstrong had a 300-pound, maybe 100-kilogram spacesuit, and he could walk on the moon because it only had 1/6 the gravity, so that spacesuit just did not feel that heavy. And you can jump higher, you can throw a ball farther on the moon because it has lower gravity, but it's not too difficult to walk on the moon. All the astronauts seem to have a good time. They almost hop like a bunny or a kangaroo. You would see them hopping on the moon. They had a little skip when they would go down walking across the moon. It just was an easy way for them to get around.
Could you run on the moon?
You could run if you wanted to. The spacesuits were not very flexible, so it would be very difficult. And what the astronauts would do, they were kind of skipping and hopping. They could go a little faster, but it was through a skipping motion.
Okay. And Lonnie's group want to know about the change of direction within the space shuttle. So maybe they're talking about what's up and what's down and things like that?
Yeah, in space, there is no up and down. Here on Earth, we pretty much agree which way is up and which way is down. But in space, we say there is no up or down. And you probably know here on Earth, if you stand on your head, all the blood rushes to your head because of gravity. And I'm sure you've all felt the pressure from that. In space, without gravity, that doesn't happen. You go upside down, you feel totally normal. And in space, again, wherever your head is pointed, that direction is up. Wherever your feet are pointed, that's down. And we're going to show you a quick picture here of two astronauts, one floating upright, one floating down. Hold on one second. We'll call this one up.
Find it. It's over there. Here. Let's go like this. Let's go like this to our Hangout. And we're going to share the screen. Hopefully it's going to work. I believe it's working. There we go.
So here you see two astronauts on my second flight. That's Nancy on the left and Kevin on the right. Well, Nancy's looking at Kevin saying, "Hey, Kevin, you're upside down." And Kevin is looking right back at her saying, "No, you're upside down." In his little world, she's upside down. In her world, he's upside down. And neither one of them is right or wrong. It's wherever your head is pointed, that direction is up for you. So everything is a little topsy-turvy in space.
That is pretty cool. So let's go back. I can see some more questions are popping up. Kendall, and I see Sebastian from India has also joined us as well. Kendall wants to know, is the American flag still on the moon?
Yes, Kendall, we had 6 landings on the moon. The first one was in 1969. The last one is 1972. So 6 times we landed astronauts on the moon. 12 astronauts have been on the moon. And on each of those missions, we planted an American flag. The Apollo 11 flag, as the astronauts were taking off from the moon, the rocket thrust from the engines sent out a plume. It caused the flag to wave back and forth, and ultimately it fell over. So one flag on the moon has fallen over. The other 5 are still standing upright.
A little bit of trivia, and I don't know if it's true or not. They say that the American flags at the moment that are on the moon are all pure white. And that's because they've been exposed to the sun and all the colors have just, been bleached out. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about that. That's a possibility.
We're going to have to find out about that.
We're going to have to find out, maybe one of our students here needs to go to the moon in a few years and check that out. I had never heard that, though, but that's a possibility.
Oh, Tammy's asking one of those tough questions. She wants to know, how do you go to the bathroom in space?
Wow, you sure you want to hear about that? Okay, well, we'll show you the toilet picture.
Okay, here we go. Let's go to see if we can share that picture. And let's go like this. And I believe it should be working.
And the quick answer is, how do we go to the bathroom in space? Very carefully. And this is the toilet on board the space shuttle. It's in a small closet area, maybe 3 feet or 1 meter across and 5 feet, 2 meters tall. And it's got a curtain that goes across the front, like a shower curtain for privacy. And right in the center of the screen of the picture there, you'll see a white toilet seat, like our toilets here on Earth. But here on Earth, we use gravity to collect all the waste in the toilet or the loo. In space, you can imagine everything's going to float up there. So this toilet is like a porta potty or a portaloo. And what we do, off to the left-hand side of this picture, there's a little white knob. We push that forward, and that'll activate fans that are down in the bowl of the toilet. And that'll suck air from the toilet seat downward. It causes a downdraft in the toilet, and all the waste material gets collected downward then, so it doesn't float out. In this porta potty, it'll fill up during a space shuttle mission. At the end of the mission, we need to bring it back down to Earth, clean it up, and then we'll launch it on another flight.
Wow, and I noticed that there were 2 little foot pedal type things sitting at the bottom there. What were those things for?
At the bottom of that picture, you'll see the 2 foot pads there, and that's for putting your feet into, so you can anchor yourself down so you're not floating all over as you're trying to go to the bathroom. It makes it a lot easier.
Aha, that wouldn't be a great thing if you were floating around and you needed to go to the bathroom. So that was a very good question. It says there, what is the, ladies class, what is the moon's surface like? Is it hard or soft? And how does the flag stand up?
Yeah, the moon's surface, it's got huge boulders, rocks. It's got a lot of craters up there from meteorites, asteroids, comets hitting the surface. It's also covered with a layer of fine dust. So when Neil Armstrong stepped off the lunar lander 50 years ago, 49 years ago, he left footprints. It's just like going to the beach, or if you have a little snow, maybe an inch or 2 of snow, you'll leave footprints in the snow. And that's what happened on the moon. They could see exactly where they walked. And those footprints are going to last for millions of years. Wow. Because there's no wind, because there's no rain, nothing will wash the footprints away. So the only thing that'll destroy the footprints are small meteorites hitting the moon, causing dust to fall up, and maybe eventually they'll be covered or destroyed. But we're pretty sure they're still there, just as crisp today as they were when Neil Armstrong left them 49 years ago.
Wow. Okay. And Jason wants to know, how long do you stay in space at a time?
On my missions on the space shuttle, our typical mission was about 2 weeks long. My longest was 16 days. Today, up on the International Space Station, our astronauts live up there for 6 months at a time, routinely. A few years ago, we had Scott Kelly and one of the Russian astronauts, he's called a cosmonaut. They stayed in space nearly a full year. But normally, our astronauts on the station stay up there for 6 months.
Wow. And the longest is a year, but do you think they're going to go for longer than that?
The longest anybody's been in space has been about 410 days. It was a Russian cosmonaut, and that was probably 30 years ago or so that they did that. That's a long time to be in space. You come back after a full year up there, your bones are fairly weak, your muscles are very weak. So we're developing new pieces of exercise equipment to send to space so that the astronauts can exercise every day and try to stay fit and in good shape for when they come back to Earth.
So I think that did touch on one of Tammy's questions. But now Susan wants to know, how do you orientate yourself for navigation purposes? Because, I mean, GPS is great, but, if your Google Maps is not working so well, what do you do?
Yeah, we have navigation equipment on board the space shuttle, and it's tied to the orientation in reference to the stars. So we align our navigation system to a known couple of stars. It knows exactly what direction we're pointed. It knows our speed, and it can calculate exactly where we are around planet Earth. Also, the folks down in mission control using really complex mathematics, they help determine our orbit too. So they know exactly where we are, what direction we're pointed, where we're heading, where we've just come from. And that's why mathematics is so important in space, for calculating our orbits, for knowing when to land. It is just something that we need to know so well. So for all of our students and learners out there, boy, I wish you would work harder in your mathematics. That'll help us out in the future.
So teachers, I hope you heard that. Your students better be working very hard at mathematics and science, because they are very important subjects. So now we go back to a question over here. Can you manufacture gravity in your space capsule?
A lot of people think that NASA has a zero gravity room. And we go into this room, we flip a switch, like a light switch, and people think the gravity goes out. And we float around, and then we turn the switch back on, and everything falls to the ground. Well, nothing like that exists. We can simulate zero gravity. If I drop something, if I drop a little object here, as it's falling, it's experiencing zero gravity up until the point that it hits something. So in space, we're actually falling around the Earth. We have zero gravity. And if we want to create gravity, what we can do is spin the spacecraft. If you've ever had a bucket of water, some of you might have tried this, where you take the bucket and you spin it around over your head. And if you spin it fast enough, the water will not fall out of the bucket, even when it's directly over your head, as long as you're spinning it. If you stop spinning it, the water's going to fall out. So we call that, like a centrifuge, spinning, and we can create artificial gravity. And we'll probably do that on long missions when we're going to Mars, and maybe when we go beyond Mars. For astronauts that are going to be in space for many years, you're going to want to create artificial gravity, again, just to keep their muscles strong and their bones strong.
And of course, in Lonnie's class, they want to know, Justin's class, are the stars any brighter in space? And that was Breland's question. Good question, Breland.
Yeah, the stars are just a little brighter in space because that light doesn't have to come through the atmosphere. The one thing that is different in space about stars is they do not twinkle. What causes the twinkling or shimmering of the stars at night is the light coming through the atmosphere. And it causes a shimmering effect. We call it twinkling. And because we're in space, we're up above the atmosphere, the starlight is coming directly from the star right to our eyes. It does not pass through any atmosphere. So the stars are steady pinpoints of light. They're still just tiny points. We're no closer to the stars, really, than we are here on Earth. We're only 200 miles or 300 kilometers above the Earth. So the stars, the shape looks the same, just a point. But in space, they don't twinkle. So the astronauts never, ever sing that Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star song.
I like that. Well, let's see. We've got a couple of questions here. Susan wants to know, how do you recharge electronic devices in space? So, if you want to charge your cell phone or your sound system, what do you do?
Yeah, we've got a power supply on board the space shuttle, and we can, we can recharge the batteries on a device, and we do that all the time. On small objects that have regular batteries, like we have in our cameras, things like that, we bring up extra batteries with us. But sometimes we're able to recharge it, like our laptop computers, things like that. Not a problem in space.
And of course, Laney wants to know, did you miss home while you were in space, and could you communicate with your family?
Lanny, that's a good question. I definitely missed my family when I was in space. And my longest mission was 16 days long. Plus, I spent a week in quarantine. So a week before we launch, they put us in a special dormitory away from our families so we don't get sick from anybody and then get sick up in space. So I miss my family. 21 years ago, during my last mission in space, I could send my family one email a day, and I could receive one email from them. They were very short emails, just 2 or 3 sentences. And then once during the mission, my wife would go into mission control in Houston, and I could talk to her on the radio for about 5 minutes. Today, our astronauts up on the space station, as I told you, they stay up there for 6 months to a year. That's a long time. That's a long time to be away from your family. So what NASA has done, they have an internet Skype-type telephone, and the astronauts can call anybody they want to anywhere around planet Earth just about 24 hours a day. And they can send unlimited emails up and down, and they get emails from all their friends and their family members. So it really helps the astronauts to stay connected. And just to show you how useful this telephone is, I was mowing my grass in Houston about 20 years ago when I lived there. And I came in the house on a Saturday morning, and my son was on the phone. He was 10 years old. I asked him, I said, "Who are you talking to?" He said, "Oh, it's Mr. Fink up on the space station." And Michael Fink was one of the astronauts, and I knew him, and he just happened to be calling me on a Saturday, and my son picked up the phone and was just chatting with him. So it's very easy to call anybody you want to around planet Earth. A great way to stay connected with your friends and family.
That is a very good one. And of course, you know, we're hoping in the not too distant future to do a Google Hangout with the astronauts while they are floating in space. And talking about floating in space, they want to know, is it any fun up there? I mean, can you do fun things in space?
You know, it's only fun if you think floating through the air like Superman is fun. And
Yeah,
who doesn't think that's fun? So instead of walking, we don't walk in space. Instead, if you want to move around, it's just a little push with your finger, and you go sailing through the air like Superman or Superwoman. And you go sailing across the space shuttle or space station until you hit a wall or until you reach out to stop your motion. If you like doing somersaults, you can start flipping in the air, and you will go round and round all day until you get tired and you reach out to stop your motion. So does that sound like fun up there? We have a blast. We have a great time up there. And something else that we do for fun, sometimes the astronauts goof around a little bit. Do any of you goof around?
I see some hands.
I'll bet
I
they
see
do.
some hands.
And what we like to do when we have free time, sometimes the astronauts will play catch. But because we don't have a ball up in space, what we'll do, we have one of the astronauts will tuck themselves into a little ball, and then two of us can play catch with that other astronaut. And it's pretty funny to watch two astronauts tossing a third astronaut back and forth across the space shuttle. If you want to spin them first, you can flip them head over heels and then give them a little push, and they go tumbling through the air. And you got to make sure you have somebody there to catch them so they don't hit the wall and hurt themselves, like bump their head. So we are able to do incredible tricks and flips up there, and it's a lot of fun in zero gravity.
That is awesome. Here's an interesting question. Can you build a puzzle in space?
Can you build a puzzle?
I mean, I suppose if it was magnetic pieces, you could put it, but if it was floating, it might make it a bit tricky.
It would be very tricky. You know, we have some games up in space. We have a chessboard up there. But again, because the chess pieces would float off the board, it's a magnetic set. And you can find these on Earth. So there's little magnets that'll hold the pieces onto the chessboard. And that's what we'll have to fly in space. So if you had a puzzle up there, you might need to have Velcro on each of the pieces, or maybe a little magnet that'll hold it down. If you had 1,000 pieces, if that was a very complicated puzzle, that would be very difficult to do in space, because you put a piece down, it might start floating away. But once you start locking them together, you know, you may be able to do that up there. I don't think we've ever sent a puzzle up. That's a really good suggestion. Maybe we'll have to try that.
I will chat to them. Then, of course, a very important question from Ariana in Justin Cook's class, and that is, are there any girl astronauts?
You know, when I was your age, we only had male astronauts in the United States, and they all came out of the military. They were all military test pilots. But starting in 1978, the United States started selecting women astronauts. You probably heard of Sally Ride. You know, in the United States, she was the first woman, the first American woman to fly in space in 1983. And she got selected in 1978, and every astronaut class since then has had more and more women in it. In my astronaut class, I had the first female space shuttle pilot. Her name was Eileen Collins, and she was an Air Force test pilot, and she got selected to be an astronaut. She became the first female shuttle pilot, and a few years later, she was the first female space shuttle commander. And she's one of the nicest people in the world. If you ever get a chance to hear her talk or meet her, she's super nice. But, you know, we're picking more and more women. In the last astronaut class, that was just 2 years ago, I think it was half men, half women. So there's a lot of opportunities. It used to be all men, but it is not like that anymore. And on every one of my space shuttle missions, we had women astronauts as part of the crew as well.
Awesome. I see that Justin's group has to go to lunch, so we'll say goodbye. And I know Tammy's group has left us as well. But Tammy did ask one very important question. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. And then, of course, Tammy wants to know, have you ever had any problems up in space?
You're very welcome. Yeah, we've had problems in space. On one of my missions, we have, instead of using solar cells to generate our electricity, solar panels, the space shuttle had something called a fuel cell. And a fuel cell takes hydrogen gas, oxygen gas, combines them together, and there's a chemical reaction, and we get electricity and H2O, water, that we create in space. But we have 3 of these. And on my third mission, the first day of the flight, one of the 3 fuel cells started acting funny. Mission Control thought it could catch fire. They were afraid it might explode and blow up. So they said, we want you to shut that one down. Wasn't a problem because we still had 2 good ones operating. But then the next day, when we woke up, Mission Control said, we're not too sure whether the other 2 don't have that same problem. So what Mission Control said had us do was, come back to Earth early. So we didn't do an emergency landing right at that second, but 2 days later, we came back to Earth. They fixed the problem, and 88 days later, they launched the space shuttle and our same astronaut crew again. So that's one of the records that I hold, is the shortest turnaround time from landing to launching on another mission. And that record is 88 days.
Wow. Susan wants to know, is isolation still a big issue in space?
Isolation is an issue because when I was in space, I felt totally detached from planet Earth. And again, there's a little bit of loneliness. You're only 200 miles, 300 kilometers above the Earth. And we would pass over Houston, Texas, where my family was. So I wasn't that far away, but I felt like I was 1,000,000 miles or 1,000,000 kilometers away. So you feel very detached. This internet Skype type telephone that we have, it helps with that isolation issue. So you can talk to your family. Some of the spouses will go into Mission Control and they can do a video conference just like we're doing today. So they can see each other and talk, privately with one another. And that really helps break that isolation. When we send astronauts to Mars in the future, and we hope to send astronauts to Mars in about 20 to 25 years from now, those missions are going to be 3 years, roughly 3 years round trip. And when you go to Mars, Mars is so far away, there's about a 15-minute time delay. So I could say, hello, Mars, and it would take 15 minutes for my voice to get there, and they would hear it and say, hello. And if they say, hello, Earth, it takes 15 minutes for that sound to reach Earth again. So to have a conversation like we're doing right now would be incredibly difficult on Mars. So what we'll probably do, maybe the astronaut sends a message back and just talks for 10 or 15 minutes. And then the astronaut stops, and then you just sit and wait for the reply. And about a half an hour later, they would receive the reply back from the individual on Earth. And then you would send these messages back and forth. It'll be a little more difficult, and you'll probably feel more isolated. One other point, something that makes you feel very isolated on Mars, when you look at the planet Earth from Mars, it is just going to be a tiny blue star. So you are going to feel far, far away from home. It'll be beautiful, I'm sure, to see the Earth, but the Earth will appear just as a blue star. You won't be able to see it as a disk at all.
Lonnie, anyone in your class want to ask more questions? You can unmute.
Natalia. Yes,
There
we
we
do.
go.
Natalia.
Sure, fire away.
How do you get oxygen?
How do you get
Do you
oxygen?
get some from space?
That's a great question. You know, in space it's a vacuum and there is no air, there's no water, there's nothing up there. So what we have to do is carry everything that we will need with us up to space. We need to bring oxygen, we need to bring food, we need to bring water, we need to bring medicine, we need to bring our clothes. There's no gas station, there's no convenience store that you can stop at. So we bring everything with us. And we have to bring all that oxygen that we're going to breathe. So we bring many, many tanks of it. We have different tanks, distributed throughout the space shuttle. So just in case one of the tanks leaks and loses its oxygen, that we have other tanks and other supplies there.
Good question.
That's a really good question and a really good point. Because what happens if you run out of oxygen in space? You're done with, okay? So you have to take up enough oxygen, or you got to make sure you get back to Earth before you run out.
Any other questions?
We've got two quick ones. Somebody wants to know how you take a full body bath. And Fox, come ask your question so he can see you. What's your question?
I'm wondering if all of your resources are gone.
All of my resources.
Like, if you lose all your resources.
Oh, do you use up everything?
If we used up everything, if we lost all it would take would be like water or oxygen, especially. If we lose our oxygen, we're done. If we lose water, how are you going to make your food up there? So we need most of these resources. Some of them, if you run out of clean clothes, you can wear your dirty clothes up there. That's not a great thing to do, but you can do it. So it just depends on what the resource is. We need oxygen to breathe, of course. We also have oxygen that we use to generate our electricity on board as well. So we need oxygen. It's a really critical resource there. And a full body bath, let me answer that question as well. We do not have a bathtub. We don't have a shower. We don't even have a sink like you have in your kitchen or bathroom at home. So when it comes time to clean up, we have little drink bags like I'm holding here. And instead of having powdered juice in these, some of them will have powdered soap. And we can add hot water. You mix up a bag of hot soapy water, put it on a washcloth, and you just give yourself a sponge bath. That's how we clean up in space. For washing our hair, we've got a special shampoo called No Rinse Shampoo. And we'll show you a picture of this one. This is called No Rinse Shampoo.
Wrong one. We're going to share the other one. Let's try that again.
Hold on one second.
We're going to share the other screen.
I'll keep talking.
You keep talking.
And so this shampoo is called No Rinse Shampoo. It was developed for people in the hospital who can't get out of bed to take a shower. It's very easy to use, doesn't require any water. All you do is squirt some of the shampoo in your hair, you work up a lather, and then you take a towel and gently pat your hair and it dries it off. And it's kind of a funny thing. On the bottom line on that bottle, I don't know if you can see it in your classroom there, but the bottom line of the bottle says, for beautifully clean, full-bodied hair. And let me show you what that looks like in space. This is Susan Still, our pilot on my last flight. And as you see here, anybody with longer hair, it's just going to float all over in space. And I'm not picking on Susan. Even my short hair floats all over in space. We say that every day in space is a bad hair day, and that's pretty accurate. Would you like to see the granddaddy of all bad hair days in space? Let me show you this one.
Yes.
Hold on.
Hold on to your seats. And if you're sitting on the floor, hold on to the floor. We don't want you falling off.
What do you think of that one?
Whoa. That is so cool.
So this is Marsha Ivins. She flew on 5 space shuttle missions. She had super long hair, as you see. She wouldn't leave it like this normally. Otherwise, for the rest of us, it would be like scuba diving through seaweed. She just put it in a ponytail, but did this for the picture. Pretty crazy, huh?
Totally.
That was cool. Any other questions? I know that there was another question that was asked a little bit earlier. can you receive videos from Earth on space, on space station?
Yeah, on the space station, they can send you up files, videos. So they would send up small clips of movies. I think they even have the capability today to send up bigger files for you. So our astronauts can watch movies up there. We've got a collection of DVDs that the astronauts can watch on their laptops. But otherwise, yeah, we have music that we can listen to for entertainment. So they can send up a lot of files for you up there. Not an issue anymore.
Wow, good question, good question. Anyone else going to ask more questions? Sebastian in India, you also allowed to ask questions too? No, he's too shy. He's too shy. He's on mute. You have to unmute yourself, Sebastian. There we go.
Yeah, too dumb to ask a question.
No, that's not true. You are always welcome to ask questions.
Sebastian, let me tell you, I passed over India many times on my flights, and 3 of my 4 missions were in July. And unfortunately, that's monsoon season in India there. So most of the time when I passed over your beautiful country, it was a little cloudy overhead. But I've been to your beautiful country 2 times visiting Mumbai, and it's a beautiful, beautiful country there down on the earth. And I'm sure on a clear day, it's great to see it from space.
Thank you so much.
Excellent,
I'm honored.
excellent. And of course, let's go back to Lonnie's group. We got any more questions? Don't be shy.
Kindred,
Give us a chance.
come on up.
So we watched a video, and I was wondering if water like floats around in space, how if you like wash your hair with hot water, how does it like not just come right out of your hair and make your hair dry?
Yeah, so what happens in space, the water will kind of stick to a surface. You know, so any liquid in space will form a perfectly round ball. And can we show a picture of that
Let's see
here?
if we can find that.
It's from a force we call surface tension. On Earth, liquids flatten out. If you pour water on a surface, it'll just flatten out because of gravity. In space, it'll form a perfectly round ball. So I'm going to show you a picture of a liquid. It's some juice, some red tropical punch juice that I've squeezed out. And what looks like a red ball in front of my face is a blob of tropical punch. So any liquid forms a round ball. It'll just float there in front of you. You can kind of gobble it up with your mouth or take a straw, poke it in there and drink it. So water will kind of stick to a surface as well. If I had a spoon in space, I could eat soup. I would dip the spoon carefully in the soup, and there would be a blob of water kind of sticking onto the spoon. And if I carefully moved it to my mouth, I could kind of slurp it up and eat soup like that. On your hair, we don't use a lot of water. I showed you that shampoo. It doesn't require any water. You can wet your hair a little bit, and you probably saw a video. It could have been, I can't remember her name.
Chris Hadfield,
Karen Nyberg.
Yes.
Had really long blonde hair, and she was showing you how to wash your hair in space. So if you add a little water, if you have really long hair, that helps with the shampoo. But otherwise, like for me, I could just maybe put the shampoo in there and work up a lather. But the water is going to kind of stick to your hair. If you shake your head back and forth, that water is going to go everywhere. But otherwise, it'll just stay on your hair. And then at the end, you take a towel, you pat it dry. If you did nothing, we have very low humidity inside our spacecraft, and all the wet hair will eventually dry and then evaporate away.
Good questions. Is there anything else you'd like to ask?
One last question.
Sure.
Aya, you're in front. Ask the question.
If you bring like any type of plant in space, can it survive like in the space shuttle or something?
Yeah, we have flown a lot of plant experiments in space. You know, here on Earth, the roots of a plant grow down because of what?
Gravity.
Because of gravity, exactly right. In space, the roots don't grow down because there's no gravity. They grow in all kinds of crazy directions. So scientists have studied what it's like growing plants in space. And recently up on the International Space Station, we've been growing more plants. We had wheat seeds that they planted, and they grew to wheat, and then they produced new seeds. So we grew some plants from seed to seed, we say. So you could harvest those seeds and plant them another crop of wheat. And that's really important. You want to be able to grow plants because in space, I took this kind of food along with me. But when you go to Mars on long missions, it would be really nice if you could grow some of your own food. So just, I think about 2 years ago, there was an astronaut named Scott Kelly who was up in space for a year. And while he was up there, they grew some lettuce plants. And they actually harvested a little bit of lettuce to eat up there. The astronauts were tasting the lettuce. They had a big smile on their face. I don't think they had any salad dressing. I'm not sure it tasted that good, but they had big smiles because they were excited to be eating the first lettuce in space. So it is a little difficult to do. We don't have big fields for growing crops. Everything has to be done on a small scale, which makes it a little bit more of a challenge. And because we don't have 24 hours of natural sunlight, or 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of nighttime, it's a little bit of a challenge with our lighting to grow plants in space as well. So we may have to use artificial lights and, we have to worry about watering them occasionally. It has been a little difficult to grow plants, but we're getting better and better at it.
Wow.
That was a great question.
Very good question. We've got an email question in. What does space sound like from Matan in Cape Town?
What does it sound like in space?
What does it sound like in space? I mean, do you hear like asteroids flying past and rockets
space?
And pew, pew. I've seen Star Wars.
Because you're flying around the Earth, 300 kilometers up, 200 miles, you're in the vacuum. And so there's no sound outside. It's perfectly quiet. But inside the space shuttle, we have a lot of fans and pumps that are circulating the air and circulating coolant in our shuttle. So there's a lot of background noise. Maybe in your classroom today, if you're perfectly quiet, you'll hear the fans, circulating the air. Or maybe you hear something going on in the hallway. And that's the way it is inside the shuttle. It's quite noisy in the background and quite noisy on the International Space Station. We get used to that background noise, so you stop listening to it. But on the space shuttle, once or twice a day, we would shut down all the fans so that we could change the filters. And once you did that, it got so quiet, you couldn't believe. It was just eerily quiet, like, wow, this is so quiet. I mean, perfectly quiet up in space. And then we turn the fans back on and you'd hear that noise again.
Wow. And now, Susan, you've given us a bunch of very interesting questions. Do you ever get headaches or fevers in space? And how do you ensure that no bugs go up with you?
Okay, the first thing, to make sure no bugs go up with us, 1 week before astronauts go to space, they go into quarantine. And so they take us away from our families. We live in a special dormitory, and we have to eat their food. NASA doesn't allow us to call up Pizza Hut and order a pizza, no delivery like that. So we have to eat whatever they prepare for us. And there are no leftovers during this time. They don't want us to put something in the refrigerator and eat it a day or two later and maybe get sick from that. So they're very, very cautious with this. And so the main thing is 1 week before launch, we go into quarantine. And that prevents us from coming in contact with people who may be sick. Because on launch morning, if I shake your hand and you have a bad cold, it'll be 3 or 4 days later when I get to space is when I'm going to get sick. And then all my crew members are going to be sick because we're in a small area together. So we make sure that doesn't happen by going into quarantine. And what was the first question?
The other one is about headaches and fevers.
Headaches. Astronauts get headaches in space. That was very frequent. And during a 2-week mission for me, I might have a headache 3 or 4 days. And a few different things cause the headaches. One of them is we have carbon dioxide. Every time we breathe out here on Earth, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. And that mixes with the air. And as you go in and out of your classrooms, all that carbon dioxide mixes with fresh air. In space, when we breathe out carbon dioxide, it stays inside the spaceship with us. And we've got special materials to absorb carbon dioxide. But if they don't work properly, the carbon dioxide level will build up, and that'll cause a headache. So many times in space, you'll feel like you have a headache. It could be due to the carbon dioxide levels getting a little high. You also tend to get headaches because in space, we don't have gravity. And so some of the fluid in your lower legs shifts up to your upper body. And you'll feel like you have a congestion, like maybe a bit of a cold. You have extra fluid in your head. and that can cause headaches as well.
Wow. And then this is
have
a
it.
fascinating question, Susan. I'm going to ask it anyway.
It's gone.
If someone farts in the space station, can you smell it?
You can smell it. You know, it's a very small area. Like if you were in a small closet and that happened, everybody would smell it. We've got charcoal filters that help remove odors from the air up there. So we, clean the air regularly. But on one of my missions, I showed you this drink bag that we also use for putting soap in for cleaning ourselves. One of the astronauts on my mission wanted to grow some sprouts in space. He wanted to have fresh sprouts to have at lunchtime. So he had a little pouch like this with seeds, sprout seeds inside, and he added water. And about day 10 of the mission, he forgot about it, and it was starting to bulge out. And he opened it up, and the seeds were kind of rotting in there, and it gave off a terrible smell. And everybody inside the shuttle was like, oh, what is that? I mean, people were almost getting sick with that. It lasted about 5 minutes, and then the filters will purify the air. So if something stinks up there, you're going to smell it, but our filters hopefully will absorb the odors.
All right, we'll come back to Susan's other question, but Lonnie, anyone in your group have another question?
We do. They're begging. They've got one
Oh,
more.
I
If you don't
love it.
mind.
The more the merrier.
Come on up.
If something breaks, like the toilet, like if the fan breaks, what happens then when
Okay.
it goes up?
Yeah, on the space shuttle, we have a lot of spare parts. We call it redundancy. Just like your car at home has a spare tire in case you get a flat, the space shuttle has spare parts as well. So I told you we have like 3 fuel cells to generate our electricity. We've got multiple oxygen tanks. So we always have a backup. If one oxygen tank has a leak, we've got others. And now with the toilet, if that breaks, that's not a huge problem because we have a backup solution. Unfortunately, the backup solution if the toilet breaks is to use plastic bags for going to the toilet, which is not very pleasant. It's a really messy operation. Somebody on my first mission broke the toilet the first day. And so we thought we'd have to use plastic bags. We were able to, fix the toilet. If we can get that toilet picture up
Let's
again,
get
I want
that
to show
toilet
you one
picture up
funny
again.
picture here.
That would be after this. I
Right
believe.
there.
Here we go. Let me
Now-
see if I can share that.
Hold on one second, everybody. I showed you that picture of the toilet earlier. And in this picture, near the upper left-hand side of the picture, you'll see a little card that looks like it has printing on it. And that's what we call a cue card. And that has the written procedure for how to go to the bathroom. So it is a detailed step-by-step procedure. Now, you probably think astronauts are really stupid because they have a procedure. They need to have a procedure for going to the bathroom. But we have a procedure for everything we do. And because the toilet is complex, you have to flip a switch and turn on the fan and do something else. We have a procedure for that. And somebody was in a rush. They didn't use that procedure and they broke the toilet. We were able to fix it, but it really points out the importance. Follow the procedure step by step. You'll never make a mistake.
Wow. Can you imagine having procedure for toilets at home? That would be quite cool.
And our procedure was quite funny. It had, what do you do? The procedure for if you have to just go number 1, or what if you just have to go number 2, or they had another combination if you had to go 1 and 2 at the same time, a different procedure. Very complex.
And could they pick what about number 3?
That's more than you needed to know here today, right?
Okay. Any other questions?
No, we're
That's
good.
kinda-
Thank you.
That's kind of a secret. Don't tell anybody that answer, okay? Let's keep that a secret.
We'll try.
I know that Susan asked another question, and it was quite a good one, in that it was, is there one problem that you can think of while you are in space that you would love to get a solution for?
One problem.
So maybe something that you see from space, and it's a problem on Earth that you'd like to solve that you've seen from space, or maybe something that you'd like to solve in space.
like I would like to see the food be better in space. So I'd like somebody to develop better tasting space food for us. That would be a big plus. That might be one area. So if the question is asking what can we improve for your life in space to be better, you know, the food would be definitely one thing. Our exercise equipment, we need more work on that to keep our astronauts healthy. So our scientists are always, you know, working on that. And maybe a quieter place to sleep, because even though it's fun sleeping in space, it's still noisy with the fans going on. And that toilet, I told you it's got the fans. When you operate the toilet, when you turn it on, the toilet sounds like about 3 or 4 vacuum cleaners. It's really noisy up there. So nobody sneaks to the bathroom in the middle of the night. If somebody turns on the fans for the toilet, everybody wakes up from that. So maybe having a quieter toilet, I would like that as well.
Yeah, but it depends on how noisy the person is using the toilet. Maybe the fans are a good thing.
The fans,
you don't have to hear all that noise.
The fans are a pretty good thing. That creates a lot of background noise. So it's a lot of toilet talk today, huh?
Okay. Susan,
We are 5th grade.
do you ever lose your taste after coming back from space?
I don't think I've ever lost my taste up in space or coming back down. And I think food tasted even better when I got back to Earth. So after eating this freeze-dried space food, I could not wait to get back and have a fresh salad, fresh fruit. You know, when we land back on Earth, NASA prepares a meal for us. And the first meal when we come back, they make a big tray of lasagna. They have fresh salad for us there. They also have a big jar of chocolate chip cookies that we get to eat. But I want you all to guess, when I get home, back to my house after I land on Earth, I walk in the front door, I walk to the telephone, I pick it up, and I call and I order what? Pizza. And I order double pepperoni pizza every time. I couldn't wait to have pizza again when I got back to Earth.
But now you hold a record with pizza in space.
I'm a special person with pizza in space. You are looking at, today, the first person ever to fly pizza in space. And how I did this, we don't have freeze-dried pizza yet, but we're allowed to carry a sandwich in our pocket in our launch suits on launch morning. In case we're on the launch pad for 7-8 hours and we get hungry, we carry a sandwich with us out there. And I asked on one of my missions, instead of carrying a turkey sandwich, could I carry a slice of pizza? And at first, NASA they were thinking, they were scratching their head, can we do that? And they said, yeah, that's fine. And the NASA staff baked a pizza for me. They gave me a little slice and we carried it up into space. So if it ever comes up at trivia night, who flew the first pizza in space? The answer is Don Thomas. And if the second part of that question is what kind of pizza was it? It was double pepperoni.
Yes.
How cool is that?
Yes.
So not many people know that. You're going to ace trivia night now.
So now we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. We're gonna give Lonnie's group a chance to ask the last question. But just quickly, how do you deal with jet lag?
Jet lag in space is really tough. They are changing our day-night cycle quite often. They'll shift our sleep schedule quite a bit depending on what's going on. Maybe you're going to be docking to the space station and they want it to be light then. So they're constantly in space changing our sleep cycle. And we got asked a question earlier about those sleep studies, and that is why they do those sleep studies on us. For one thing, we get sunrise every 90 minutes in space, but it's mainly one of the main reasons we don't sleep well is they're shifting our time in space. So on my first mission, for about a week, I had to go to bed every night about an hour earlier. And after a week, you're going to bed an hour, 7 hours earlier than your normal bedtime. You wouldn't be tired at that time. So it made it very difficult to sleep. But if you just let astronauts live on a normal 24-hour day without any shifting of their sleep, it's quite comfortable, and we don't have any big issues with sleeping up there.
Awesome, awesome. And of course, Susan is actually in Pretoria, and she's got a classroom at a high school in Garsfontein. And if you ever go and do some Google searching on Garsfontein, you will know that is out in Pretoria. But now, and Lonnie, where are you guys based?
We are in Gainesville, Florida.
Hey, Gainesville, Florida. That is very close to
Space Center
Disney
down-
World.
Yep, Disney World there.
Woo! And do you guys go to Disney World all the time?
Of course we do.
No, I've never been. No.
Happiest place on earth.
Apparently so. Apparently so. Not when you have to buy the food there, because apparently that's not the happiest prices that you have to pay. But now, do you have any questions from your group?
We have one from Kindred.
Hello, Kindred.
Sorry. Hola. So we were also watching one of your videos, and about the packaging the food, is it like stay like frozen or however it is, or does it become like something?
Well, the food is, like, I'm holding a package here. The food is all freeze dried, so it's solid. It's a solid chunk of food in there. And once we get to space, we add water, and that food will soften up. And then we cut that package open, and we eat it with a normal fork or spoon. What you're looking at here is a package of cream spinach, and it's 21 years old, so it looks terrible. But even the normal cream spinach looks pretty terrible. When you add hot water, it'll turn bright green, and it'll appear more like normal cream spinach. But the food is okay in space. It's not super delicious. And as I told you, I couldn't wait to get back to Earth at the end of the mission and get a hamburger or pizza, something like that.
So that was a good question.
Very good question.
I mean, I know you can't have microwaves up there, but wouldn't it be great if you took whatever it was that you wanted to heat, you spin it around, and while it's in the air and the microwave is on, wouldn't that work?
I guess it would work. Instead of having to spin the food, you could just spin the package inside of a microwave.
So could you do that?
Did I do that?
No, could they do that?
I think they could do that. You could spin it, close the door quickly, and it would spin around, and you could microwave your food that way and keep it nice, evenly heated.
We're going to be starting some new ideas for the space station very soon. So just to end off, because we've now come to the end of the interview, where to next? Where are we going next in our missions to space?
Well, the space shuttles that I flew on are all in museums. Right now, we've got Space Shuttle Atlantis at the Kennedy Space Center, Space Shuttle Discoveries in Washington, D.C., and Space Shuttle Endeavour is out in California at the California Science Center in Los Angeles. So NASA is building a new rocket called the Space Launch System. And this will be the biggest, most powerful rocket ever built. And with these new rockets, instead of space shuttles for our astronauts, we're going to have small capsules on top that'll hold 4 to 6 astronauts. And those capsules are called the Orion, and that'll be on top of the rocket. Let me show you a few pictures. Our astronauts, this is how they'll launch inside the capsule. This is exactly how I launched on the space shuttle, laying on my back on a seat like that. But we landed like an airplane. These capsules are going to come down by parachute and land in the ocean, and we'll recover the astronauts then. The first test mission of this new rocket is called Exploration Mission Number 1, and it's going to launch in about 1.5 years from the Kennedy Space Center. And what we're going to do is launch an unmanned rocket and capsule. We're going to send it around the moon for 10 days and then bring it back to Earth. And if everything works good on that first mission, then the second mission will have astronauts on board. And what are our plans? We hope to send astronauts back to the moon. We hope to visit asteroids, and we hope to go on to that red planet. What's that one called, Mr. Sherman?
I think it's called,
what is that one?
Do you kids know? What is the red planet called?
Mars.
That's
Yeah,
the
Mars. So we
one.
hope to go to Mars. So here you see an artist's drawing of a landing on the moon, building a lunar base. Here's a mission visiting an asteroid. We'd like to collect some samples of these asteroids. These are early remnants of our solar system, about 4.5 billion years old. Here's a mission to one of the moons of Mars. And in the lower right-hand corner, you may see an astronaut floating there. I think it'd be so incredible to be that astronaut and you look over your shoulder and you have the red planet Mars in the background. And 20 to 25 years from now, we hope to land astronauts on the surface of Mars with these new rockets called Space Launch System. And here's an artist's drawing of that day. So you see the landing craft there in the picture, and then to the right of it, you see the shadowy figures of the first 2 humans setting foot on Mars. And do you know who those astronauts are right there? It's not astronauts like me. I'm too old to go to Mars because in 25 years, I'll be 88. I'm too old to go to Mars. Your parents are too old to go to Mars. Never, ever repeat this at school, but your teachers are too old to go to Mars. The astronauts who will be setting foot on Mars are represented by your generation. For all of our students and learners here, we call you the Mars generation. And it'll be one of you 20, 25 years from now that will be the first human setting foot on Mars. So with these new rockets that we're building, we're going to have incredible capabilities to go to the moon, asteroids, Mars, and even beyond that in the future.
Awesome, awesome. Now we do have one last question here. It got emailed in from Leo. Leo wants to know, do you keep a diary in space? And number 2, what happens if you put a marshmallow outside of the rocket? What will happen to that marshmallow?
Okay, I did keep a diary every day. Before I would go to bed at night, I would write an entry in there just to write down some of my experiences, what I saw, how I was feeling. I did that every day of my all 4 of my flights. And I wrote a book a few years later, and I was able to use that diary and remind me of, oh yeah, I forgot about this and forgot about that. So diaries can be very useful, and they're fun to look back at, years later. And the marshmallow, if you took a marshmallow and you stuck it outside the space shuttle, for example, since the space shuttle's traveling at 18,000 miles an hour, or that's about 28,000 kilometers an hour, if you stick a marshmallow outside, it's also going to be traveling at those high speeds. And at nighttime, when the sun goes down, the temperature drops. It gets to be about minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 100 degrees centigrade. So that marshmallow is going to freeze. And then 45 minutes later, when it hits the sunlight, the marshmallow is going to get a very hot temperature, like 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees centigrade. And so that marshmallow is probably going to melt. So it's either going to be frozen solid or melting, frozen solid or melting. I don't think we've ever taken marshmallows to space. And I know we've never taken them outside, but that's a great experiment. Maybe that's something you guys can do on your way to Mars.
I think just to end off, just thinking about maybe, Leo, we could possibly take some crackers and some marshmallows, and when they melt and then free, we could make some s'mores in space. It's not a bad idea.
Some great s'mores with some delicious chocolate in the middle there too. Yep, I'm all for.
There we go. There we go. So I'm afraid we've come to the end of our interview. We hope that you guys had fun. We had a whole bunch of viewers that joined us live, and I know that people were watching it at home and sending through some questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Sebastian and Lonnie and Susan, your students there in Garsfontein, and of course all the others that tried to. We had a couple of schools in South Africa that tried to join in, but they didn't have any electricity, and unfortunately they had to bow out. But they'll be able to watch the recorded interview afterwards at a time that is convenient for them. So thank you very much. We'll say goodbye to all of you, and we're going to just quickly do one photograph of the two of us.
Okay.
You have to smile at the camera. That's the camera there.
You guys are
Awesome.
smiling.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
We'll see you on Mars.
Oh, let's get a photograph of you guys together. Now that we've got the lights on. So get together as a group. We'll get a photograph of you.
You're taking a photograph. Guys,
That's
go
a
all
photo.
get in the photo
Have we got all of you?
without getting hurt.
We need Ronnie in there, too.
Yeah, to make sure we got everyone in there. We got them all. That's a good one. I think we got it one more time. Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Awesome.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Thomas.
so much. You're welcome.